Yeah, and welcome Alan Switzer, who is Director at the Sports Business Group at Deloitte. Alan, welcome. How have you been these last couple of weeks, the last couple of months even?
Yeah, we've been surviving basically with every baby step of normality. Premier League starting later this week, hopefully. So getting there. Horse racing started.
Horse racing has started. Yeah, that was a nice welcome return. So we're kind of getting towards some kind of normality now. Now, we're here to discuss the annual report on football finance, which focuses specifically on the 2018-2019 season. That was released last week. The numbers were brilliant painted a really rosy picture of football across Europe and across England, up until the point where we've had COVID-19 pandemic and everything stopped. So I want to discuss some of the highlights of that report that you put out. Obviously, there were some key figures that came out of that. Premier League, the record revenues were across the board were really good. The Championship and the EFL as a whole, really, really good results. So can we just maybe focus on how the clubs have been able to do that?
Yeah, so let's start in the Premier League. As you say, certainly it was a good news story from revenue generation. So the Premier League is fantastic at revenue generation. And so that exceeded 5 billion for the first time, 5.2 billion. And that's kind of driven across the patch broadcast, match day, commercial. In fact, actually, the Premier League clubs this year, or 18-19, as you say, benefited from increased UEFA distributions. So that really helped, obviously, including Liverpool's victory. So that was great. And even the Football League itself combined revenues of over 1 billion for the first time. So fantastic success story from a revenue perspective. There were some warning signs in terms of profitability even before COVID-19 came along.
Yeah, and so what were those warning signs? What impact was that?
So in the Premier League, we'd seen operating profits. I mean, still over 800 million, so still very strong, but we'd seen a dip. And actually we'd actually seen pre-tax losses, transfers weren't quite as favourable. So there were some warning signs there, but mainly it was the Championship, where we had a wages to revenue ratio of 107%. So for every pound generated, £1.7 was spent on wages. And that is clearly unsustainable, full stop. But in a COVID-19 world, it's even worse.
Yeah. So let's go to the Championship and that figure that you've just mentioned there, 107% of turnover. How are clubs able to do that?
So it's a very reliant on owner contributions, basically. So it's the real competition to try and get into the Premier League, the riches of the Premier League. So it's required ongoing owner contributions, but that isn't sustainable going forward. And there are some regulations also as well, obviously, around how much owners are allowed to put in, what losses you're allowed. And a number of the clubs have been, fallen foul of those regulations as well. So the warning signs were there already, very clearly, and we've been saying that for many years. Obviously, things have got exacerbated in the last 3-4 months.
Yeah. And obviously now the full impact of COVID-19, the football's been pretty much cancelled for the last 2 months. We're just about to restart. The Premier League's going to restart. The Championship's going to restart. But those clubs in League One and League Two, their seasons have been curtailed. What do you think the impact's going to be with those? Because both of those leagues posted pretty decent numbers in the league in the year 2018 to 2019.
They did. I think what's going to happen, and I think the decision to cancel those two leagues is understandable, given that a very significant portion of their revenue was match day, and therefore, from a financial perspective, this season didn't make sense to finish. So, what that means going forward is it means all the stakeholders to properly work together to work out how we get through this, basically. So, the PFA are working with the EFL and the clubs and the players basically to try and identify what's the size of the financial hole that's going to arise from that. How long might that go on in terms of state matches in front of no fans? How do we fund this? How do we get through it? And there will be some pain, and unfortunately it'll have to be shared by all the stakeholders. And I think the players have already indicated that they're willing to support the clubs in that, but it will need that effort.
Yeah. And do you think there's a danger that we might see some clubs in those leagues going out of business? Like obviously, there's the start of this season, we had Bury, we almost lost Bolton. I mean, clubs like that, is there a danger that we'll see some of those clubs enter administration at some point in the near future?
So look, we really hope not, but I think it's been unrealistic to say that there isn't. So there is a threat of that, which is why it does really come down to that all working together, that collective working together from the football authorities, the individual clubs, the players, the owners, potentially new investment from new owners, new financiers. All those things will need to happen for the clubs to be protected. And we hope that coming out of this, if we get through, as we get through this, and we will get through it, that we might see a more robust business model for those clubs going forward as well. So, but we have to get there first. And to get there, we have that collective effort.
Yeah. And just going back to the championship and focusing on that that wages to turnover ratio, that's a real problem for the championship. How can the championship, how can the AFL change that and drive that revenue, that ratio down?
Yeah, so I think so we've suggested, we did some illustrative modelling that if you had some sort of salary cap set at 70% of turnover, that would really make a massive inroads into the losses there. In fact, it would almost deal with them completely. And look, while still maintaining the competitive balance of the championship, which we know is a fantastically competitive league, and that's part of the trouble, really, in a way, from a financial perspective, because there's only 3 spots to get promoted, and the number of clubs that are very aggressively going for that is significantly more than that. So, and those who don't make it, then the sort of consequences. So I think it's the obvious thing in terms of that, just a readjustment between revenue, which has never been a problem, but wages, which has been a problem.
Yeah. But there's obviously there is quite a big disparity in that league as well, from those at the top and those at the bottom, and then you have the clubs that are coming down from the Premier League with the parachute payments. How it's such a complex league to kind of introduce some kind of financial restraint into. How do we work around that?
I mean, it is complex, and I think that's part of the reason why we haven't seen as much regulation as maybe was as needed now in years past. But out of these crises, sometimes you do find different solutions and different ways of thinking by necessity. In this case, basically. So I think that's got to be part of it. Yes, in terms of, you mentioned by parachute payments as well. That's quite a topical one, isn't it? People have different views on the good or evil, as we kind of say in the publication on parachute payments. It is worth noting that quite a fair number of the clubs who get parachute payments don't go back up again. So because it's such a competitive league, and often the football squads you inherit if you get relegated aren't necessarily ideal for the rough and tumble of the championship.
Yeah. And in terms of the way championship clubs make their money, how are they going to have? Are they going to have to rebalance where they get money from? What areas of commercial activity is there going to have to be some way restructure, I suppose, on how they generate cash, but also how they spend cash?
Well, definitely in the spending cash. In terms of the generation, then we have got a new football league broadcasting deal, which was significantly increased, so that's good. And the money which flows down from the Premier League as well, so that again is good and necessary. In terms of the other 2 streams, the match day obviously is still a significant proportion for many of the clubs. When will that fully come back on again in the season, next season? We just don't know, really. And then commercial, I mean, again, that will maybe come down a little bit to the financial position of those sponsors and commercial partners. I mean, sport and football in particular is still something that sponsors want to be associated with. The passion of that, the kind of very few other things give them that. But there may be some short-term pain because there are those corporate ability to enter into such sponsorship activities, maybe in the short term threatened. So I think it's the clubs identifying, they're working very closely with their commercial partners, giving as much value as they can, where they have to find new ones, being innovative about that. And it does again need that kind of partnership approach.
Yeah. And in the Premier League, a huge proportion of the club's revenue generation is from the TV rights. How significant is that going to be for those clubs from now going into the next season?
It's really interesting to see what's going to happen on the Premier League broadcasting rights, because we've got all the remaining games being televised on one or more of the channels. So we're really and with different times and different ways of doing things by necessity. Very interesting to see what happens there in terms of the broadcasting, the figures, the viewing figures, basically. So, we've all missed our football. So many of us kept our subscriptions. Will that, in a world where certainly at the start of next season there isn't any, in person, does that drive even further subscriptions? Does it drive even more broadcast figures? Does that increase value? At the same time, it's not quite the same thing. It is behind closed doors. It's a horrible word, but different product from a broadcast perspective. How will that look after an extended period? Interesting to see. Amazon are ready to put their toe in the water last for this broadcasting cycle. That seems to have gone well. Will that, for the next round of broadcasting deals, which is about a year and a half, will they become more involved? Could that drive value? But there's a lot of things going on, and what we do know, however, is that football is still absolute kind of killer content when it comes to broadcast.
Yeah, and obviously the games are going to be broadcast, and there's a lot of games that are going to be broadcast that we wouldn't normally have saw. We're going to see broadcast on the BBC for the first time. Amazon have got their games, like you said, the Sky, BT. There's a whole new. Everybody's really excited to get football back. Do you think this will have an impact on the way that you just touched on it there, but the way that the broadcast rights are structured and the values of them?
So I think that it's definitely great. It's an interesting experiment in terms of what works well, what works maybe less well in terms of the games we're going to see in the rest of the season. Could that lead to more kind of changing of how the packaging happens going forward? It could do. I mean, the Premier League is always evolving how it packages games and expands the games and tries different things. I think that would have happened naturally anyway. This maybe just provides another lens by which you can, see how what things have worked and what worked well. Do we see complete wholesale change? Some people have said every game's going to be live going forward in future seasons, and we don't see that, but we do see some experimentation.
Yeah. And across Europe, part of the report showed that revenues were up in leagues across Europe as well. We had growth in La Liga and the Bundesliga. Now, those two leagues have been able to resume, and the Bundesliga has been going for a couple of weeks now. La Liga returned this weekend. Do you expect that little head start that those two leagues have had to impact on their commercial revenues and broadcast rights going forward?
We do certainly for the season just passed, or season just being completed, if we say 1920, because the Bundesliga's back earlier, finished earlier. Then, from a rather dull accounting perspective, they can recognise more of their revenue than La Liga can. So that will almost certainly mean that Bundesliga becomes the second biggest league in Europe. Again, a long way behind the Premier League. It'll probably almost certainly see that. We'll probably, when we get back to leagues, hopefully, the normal seasons again, we will probably see La Liga just edging ahead of Bundesliga again. But it is between those two to be the second biggest league in Europe, and then we have a drop down to Italy and then a further drop to France.
Yeah. And what do you think the impact will be on leagues like the French league, who cancelled? They drew a line under their league. What do you think that'll impact will be on that league as financially?
Well, from the season just passed, obviously has had a fair hit, and again for season 2021, when we get those going, I mean, all the leagues are in that same predicament of basically when can they get people back in the stadia? How robust are their commercial partners in terms of being able to stay with them, and that whole dynamic about value for broadcasters. So all got slightly different challenges, but there's a lot of commonality at the same time.
Yeah. And in terms of match day revenue for clubs across the leagues, across the Championship, Premier League, across Europe, that it's going to be a significant hit that clubs are going to take from that, because the fans aren't there. And how do you think clubs are going to live with that for now?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, it's match day is, it's, well, one thing this has proven is the value of fans is huge, isn't it? Because that's, that's the passion of the game. That's one of the things, it drives the excitement, it drives the energy, adrenaline. So fans themselves are critical to the game. In terms of the direct financial aspects of the match day, then for Europe, that's by far the smallest revenue source. So kind of be 15-20% for the big leagues. So look, it's a hit. Of course, it's a hit. And almost certainly there will have to be some action taken on the cost base, with wages the obvious place that needs to be certainly in the short term looked at. It is at least it's better if one revenue stream from a financial perspective is going to be hit, then it's best of this match day. But that's not ignoring the fact that for football to be at its best, it needs to be played in front of fans.
Yeah. So how's that going? I mean, obviously, if fans can't be there, we're going to take a hit on match day revenue. Will that impact on the commercial value of a club's sponsorship base?
It certainly threatens it. Yes, I mean, a lot of the big sponsors will be contracted for 2-3 years anyway. So contractually, anyway, they certainly are still are still contracted, albeit their core business, in many cases, will be severely hit. I mean, you look at airlines, for instance, in terms as a major sponsor of football, and clearly that's taken a huge hit. So there probably will be some that probably need to exit the game for a while. It does give the opportunity for other industries, other brands to come in to support football. It's still a core. It's still a valuable property. It's still, what people want to be associated with. But will there be some potential short-term pain? I think that's inevitable.
Yeah. And one of the things in the report that you highlight is that you do expect a recovery in the next season. You termed it as a V-shaped recovery. But is there a danger that there is also going to be a polarization of wealth? So the bigger clubs are going to recover quicker than the smaller clubs?
There is a threat of that. Yes, there is a threat of that in terms of if we think about commercially, they tend to have the bigger commercial brands with the biggest clubs anyway, who are more robust financially. Even if they lose one or two of those, then there tends to be more likelihood of replacements coming in. So there is a threat that polarization was happening anyway. There's certainly a threat that could happen. It could accelerate it. I think there is still that back to the role of trying some collective effort between the football authorities and the clubs as well, because the strength of our league is all those clubs being competitive with each other. Basically, you don't want to get in a scenario where you have sort of 1-2 absolute dominant teams, because again, that in the long term kind of reduces the attractiveness.
Yeah. And do you think there's an appetite amongst the leagues to level that playing field?
It'd be interesting to see, because, for instance, the new UEFA distribution mechanism favoured the biggest leagues. Whether there's an appetite to revisit any elements of that, even if it's just in the short to medium term, to support those, countries, clubs, and smaller countries. Let's wait and see.
Yeah. Okay. Right, Alan, I'm going to leave that there.
Okay.
Thanks for taking the time. And
no worries.
And hopefully we'll have some football back. We'll have it in front of fans, and we'll be able to enjoy a normal life.
We will. I know. Crazy times.